What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a discussion video of sorts talking about an article I have seen over and over and over again this year about people playing less new games than ever. And just the repetitive nature of having seen that so many times this year, it was finally the straw that broke the camel's back, and I decided to, of course, make a video about it, which is why we're here. So, the crux of these articles are usually about some survey that tells us what should be obvious, I feel like, which is that every year people play less and less new video games. That is to say, within like the last year or two old. We see this in surveys, Steam's own player data, and I wanted to sort of break this down, at least how I think about it, and talk about the ins and outs of that. But first, to sort of set the stage, a couple of things worth noting. For starters, if you're watching a video like this, chances are you're already pretty far and away from the average consumer in terms of what they're buying and doing. You're consuming secondary media from a random guy who reviews video games for a living. And while I certainly appreciate that viewership, reality is most people simply do not care. The fact that you're here, the fact that you clicked on this video, shows some inherent interest that already separates basically everybody watching this video from the general public, let's say. And that's important because that indicates that you are more than likely inclined to buy more video games, especially new ones, than the average person. And given the fact that I review games, and while I do cover plenty of old games, yes, a lot of new ones at that, you are at the very least looking to inform yourself about them. And so the general consensus that we might get in the comments section here is likely not really representative of the, again, general public. Another thing, I do want to state that despite the topic of the video and the tone of all the articles and surveys and stuff you'll read about this kind of thing, the industry is fine. It's making more money than ever. And even if this stuff were somehow an existential threat to the industry, I don't think it would be the worst thing in the world that some of these publishers or developers might have to look at a way to cut down development costs, because I think it is unsustainable. People have been saying that for years. And even in the worst case scenario, people love and are passionate about video games, they will continue to get made, and it will adapt one way or another. But from there, let's dive into the rest of this. So, people are playing less and less new games. To me, I feel like this should be immediately obvious for the thing that first springs to mind every time I see this, and that is that there are less new games every year than there are old games. Every single year that passes, there are more already released games than ever. Meaning that it is infinitely easier for a lot of people to spend time on things they already know they enjoy than take a risk paying for something they may or may not actually enjoy. People find something they like and they don't necessarily like change, or are they looking for it, that kind of thing. And so they continue to play the games they know and love. The longer the video game industry continues, the more that will continue to happen until eventually, I don't know, however many decades in the future, I bet that the number of new releases people are playing will be so hilariously small to the number of old games people continue to play. And that's before you even start looking at the other factors that somewhat accompany that. So if people are playing or paying for less and less new games, there's a variety of things that can contribute to that kind of thing. I think an obvious one off the top of my head is stuff like Game Pass. You're going to pay the subscription service, then you're not actually buying the game. There's been a million conversations about that, the effect it has, positive, negative, and I'm not really looking to get into all that as a side conversation here, but it doesn't change the fact that a lot of people use that as a service to play new games that they would not otherwise pay for, which is obviously tied to this conversation. The other part of that being rising costs. Why would somebody want to pay for a subscription like that? Well, the price of the individual games has gotten so out of reach, especially, with everything else going on in the world these days. Costs have only ever gone up, and it's been a pretty expensive couple of years to be a gamer, in fact. Which is why the people more invested in the medium, who are more willing to pay for these things, have done a lot in terms of propping up what is there. And then you take the very simple step of combining some of that together. You've got, again, an ever-growing list of games that are old, that have been out, and as a result are going to be cheaper than newly released games, and for most people it becomes a very simple conversation. Why would I pay the highest price for a game that is likely going to be in its worst possible state, given that it will almost certainly get things like patches, updates, potential DLC over the course of like a year or two post-release in most cases, and then if you wait a little while, you'll likely catch it on sale anyway. So why pay for this game at release when I can play a game that already exists in its best state for a cheaper price than this new game? And I guess to put it very simply, for the vast majority of people who are not, say, running a review channel on YouTube or simply looking for, the best and new experiences via the medium, the people who are hyper invested in like just what video games are, barring that individual, new video games are a pretty terrible value proposition for the vast majority of people. You are paying the most for the worst version of something, and if you cannot be bothered with the sort of cultural moment that is some of these initial releases, be that either just lack of genuine interest or you don't necessarily have the discretionary spending for that individual release, things like that, then you know that just waiting for a while will get you more than likely a better version of that game for cheaper. And I would hazard a guess then that the vast majority of the population of people who game at all fall into that camp. I have actually made videos talking about games you could play for hundreds of hours for like less than $10, or I've talked about some of my favorite free RPGs that you don't have to pay for at all. And that's not even like counting, of course, all the free-to-play stuff, which is another conversation you could get into about, again, offering something for free to get people in the door. Though, again, those are usually attached to more monetization schemes that see people spending even more money. But point being, it does not take a rocket scientist to figure out that you can just not buy something when it releases, wait for it to be cheaper, and more often than not in a better state. Especially with, as I mentioned earlier, the growing sort of bank of old video games that aren't going anywhere and are already cheap. So it's like by the time you get done running through older titles that have come and gone, that new title that you wanted to play is probably already going to be on sale because of, again, the cycle of how many games are releasing all of the time, which is only ever going to continue. Which is all to say that, yes, obviously, people are playing less and less new video games every year. It is very strange to me that I keep seeing this just, again, repeated every couple of months as if it's some sort of surprise and not just the incredibly obvious thing that it is. Now, I could leave it there, but I would actually like to take it even a little bit farther. Another sort of aspect of this, I think, is that people get used to things. There's a lot of names for this, but by and large, good or bad, somebody deals with something long enough, whatever it is, they will get used to that thing. Video games are often like this. There's a whole sort of a little conversation rabbit hole you can find yourself down about the games people wish they could play again for the first time so they could capture the feeling of what that thing was when it was new. Because once you've seen something, you can't sort of unsee it, which is why people always get so up in arms about things like spoilers, etc. Once you know, you know. And that actually also applies to video games with people. So once you've played a type of video game, while you certainly might enjoy more of it, you are going to get used to that thing. I've played a ton of CRPGs. It's kind of like my whole thing. I love them, but I pretty much know what they are at this point. And while I, again, as somebody who runs a YouTube channel reviewing games for a living, am more than happy to keep playing them as they come out, why would the average person want to continue to play a new game that, when you boil it down, really just feels like all of the other games in that genre? Again, unless you're like a diehard fan, that might not necessarily be a new experience for you in the way you want it to be, which then it sort of lacks that feeling of a fresh experience. And thus, to quote Smiling Jack from Bloodlines, it's never as sweet as the first time. And so I think it's pretty likely that people in that situation are really only going to be looking for games that actually seem to be doing something genuinely new and interesting to them, which again cuts down on the potential new games they would be willing to pay for. And so to start bringing this to a close, I love video games a lot more than most people. I spend a lot more money on video games, even with the review keys, than most people. Though obviously that's a little different for me as it is a business expense, that kind of thing. However, and with that in mind, I acknowledge that there is a little more nuance to this conversation. Sure, I think there are indie devs who are obviously going to be more adversely impacted by people not buying a game at launch. Like if those particular games do poorly at launch, there's a good chance that might just be the end of that studio, as they don't have nearly the amount of wiggle room as the industry behemoths do. And so if you find yourself in a position to support indie devs who are working on a project that you really enjoy, I would encourage you to shell out that cash and hopefully help them make more of the things you enjoy. But to say that that is just always the case across every single developer and publisher out there also isn't true, because as with anything, there are levels to it. But for the most part, people are going to gravitate towards the thing that gives them the most value for their money, especially when they are not overly caught up in the sort of larger medium that is video games. And so this trend is only going to continue. But that, at least for me, is how I feel about it. I'm sure you have your comments, if you haven't wrote them already, that you're going to share down in the comment section below, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.